I'm Paul.
And I'm Oumaer.
And welcome to Skip the Rulebook, your hyperdrive through the rulebook, getting you to your new game in less than 12 parsecs.
Today we'll be going from Green Cadets to Elite Space Commanders in Hull Breach in Defiance of Dictators. In this game, you'll be engaging in an interstellar war, fighting for the noble cause of your faction or just a taste of personal glory.
You'll need to employ all of the deadly warships and stalwart marines you can muster if you're to emerge not only victorious, but simply alive.
Would you like to know more?
Let's skip the rulebook.
We won't be needing this. The first thing you'll find in the box is the player crib sheet. The cards used in Hull Breach carry a large number of symbols and special abilities that potentially can be intimidating to new players. The game ships with this sheet and allows you to keep track of what's what during the game. Hull Breach is based on a very rich background story. The game ships with a fiction supplement, which will set the scene and give you some idea of the motivations of each of the factions available to play. At its core, Hull Breach is a game of space warfare. The 10-sided dice, referred to as volley dice, are used for a range of actions, including but not limited to shooting giant lasers at your enemy. The packs of coloured markers are used to keep track of everything, from wounds to economy to a myriad of other abilities.
The game itself revolves around the use of a player deck. This contains your fighting force, including space station, ships, and marines. In Defiance of Dictators, ships with 4 of these, which means you can potentially play with 4 players straight out of the box. Inside the deck, the first thing you'll find are your resource and currency stockpiles. These allow you to keep track of how much you're spending on building and equipping your army each turn. The station is where you'll be issuing your inspired orders from. You must expand, reinforce, and above all defend this, as if it's destroyed or captured, you're out of the game. The mainstay of your defense is your ships. You build these throughout the game not only to defend your station, but also to take the fight to the enemy. You can build everything from nippy fighters to hulking capital ships. Marines are the foot troops of your force. If employed effectively, these can be exceedingly useful as you can capture enemy ships to add to your own deadly fleet. The module upgrades and options cards are enhancements that can be added to your station, ships, and marines respectively. These infer bonuses to stats or even new abilities to the unit they're attached to. Breakthrough cards are like research. They're a way of upgrading the effectiveness of your entire army in one go by giving you access to a new piece of technology. The final 2 types of cards, event and tactic cards, differ only in when they can be played. These represent an inspired feat of individual bravery from your troops, or an uncanny turn of good luck that can change the outcome of an action or battle. Although Hull Breach was initially designed as a head-to-head 2-player game, In Defiance of Dictators adds a range of mechanics that make it feel much more at home as a multiplayer game as well. Although we've played with mainly between 3 and 4 players, theoretically, provided that each player has their own deck, there's no limit to the number of protagonists, although each additional player does increase the game duration. The aim of Hull Breach is to destroy the stations belonging to your opponents. As each station is destroyed, that player is removed from the game. The last surviving player wins. To begin the game, each player gets an initial phase in which to build their station and starting forces. This is known as the setup phase. Begin by placing your resource and currency stockpile cards in front of you. Then place one of the tokens on the number 10 on both cards. Next, search through your deck and find your station card, and similarly place it face up in front of you. You also start with 2 station module cards. These should be placed next to your station at no cost. Each deck will normally have several of these, so it's up to you to choose the one that will give you the most benefit in the early stages of the game.
Once your station is built, you're going to need to defend it. Shuffle your remaining deck and place it next to your station. This is your shipyard. You must draw a hand of 5 cards from the top of this deck. If you don't like your hand based on ship combinations, events, or any other card, you can use a mulligan to discard it and draw a new hand. Place your discarded cards face up next to your station. This is your scrapyard. Then draw another 5 cards from the top of your shipyard. You can mulligan as many times as you like, but it'll cost you 1 resource and 1 currency each time you do. Deduct these from your stockpiles accordingly.
Even though you begin the game with a stockpile of money and resources, your empire can always make more. Once you've drawn your hand, you get a chance to use your station to increase your stockpiles before we begin spending on any ships. The station card, as well as the ship cards, have a range of numbers on them. These will be explained as we go, but for the moment the ones we're interested in are the upwards and downwards facing arrows in the top right of the card. The black ones indicate resources and the gold ones indicate currency. Downward facing arrows tell you how much that card would cost to play during the game. An upward facing arrow tells you how much they generate each turn. So for example, this station will generate 3 resources and 4 currency, which I add to my stockpile. Module cards, as well as certain ship cards, can also generate currency and resources. You should add on any additional resources and currency to your stockpiles generated by your 2 starting modules, so I gain an additional 2 resources and 2 currency. Now we just need to figure out how to spend them.
The next part of the setup is to build any units I want from my starting hand of 5 cards. Although my first 2 station modules were free, any further units I want I must pay for. During the setup phase, any event or tactics cards cannot be played unless it specifically tells you on the card that it can be, so I'll put these 2 aside for now. That means I must now decide which of the ships, marines and modules I want to play, assuming I can afford to do so. I'm going to start with a cruiser. This is a middle of the range ship and should be a good point to start with my defense. I pay the required resource and currency cost and then place it in front of me, face up. The easiest way to initially judge how good a ship is to look at the numbers at the bottom of the card. The target represents how good it is at shooting, the cross how much health it has, and the shield how difficult it is to damage. Generally speaking, the higher the numbers the better the ship, although we'll go into specifics later.
The ships you employ may be armed to the teeth, but that doesn't mean they're safe from infiltration and capture. So I'm going to play a unit of Marines next. Suffice to say, Marines cannot just be set floating around in space and need a nice comfy warm ship or station to live on. Each ship or station module card has on it a symbol in the bottom left that looks like a Marine. This tells you how many units of Marines may be stationed on that ship or module. If the symbol is grey, you can't station any there. In the case of my cruiser, I can place a maximum of 1 unit of Marines on that ship. I again pay the resource and currency cost and place the card in play. I must, however, tuck it underneath the ship in order to indicate that it's stationed on that cruiser. This is called attaching. When you attach a card, you must ensure that you place it so that the stat bar and any text is hidden. The reason why will become apparent later. The next unit available to me is a wing of fighters. Although this is represented by a single card, it can be imagined to be anywhere up to around 60 smaller ships. These can be played into space in the same way as any other ship card, once paid for. Fighter wings can also be attached to other ships in the same way as Marine squads. Almost every ship or module card has got a symbol towards the bottom right that looks like a fighter with a number on it. This tells you how many fighter wings that ship can carry in its bays. It's important to mention at this point that fighters are reliant upon their motherships for movement. Fighters cannot fly to an enemy station unless they're carried inside another ship. This means that if you play a fighter without another ship that has capacity to carry it, you've immediately limited it to a defensive role. The next deployable small unit is known as a drone. These act pretty much like unmanned fighters with a couple of exceptions. Drones cannot be played into space. You can only build a drone if you've got a ship with spare capacity to carry it. Ships can carry drones if they have drone capacity indicated by this symbol, or if they have a fighter bay. Obviously, if you deploy a drone into a ship's fighter bay, it takes up one of the spaces that could have been used for a fighter. It's important to note that while drones can be put into fighter bays, fighters cannot be put into drone bays. From a thematic point of view, you've got to imagine that the crew of the fighter would need life support facilities that are not present in a drone bay.
Rather than building a new marine or ship, you also have the option to enhance one of your existing units. There are 3 types of enhancement cards: modules for stations, options for marines, and upgrades for ships. Module station cards are placed adjacent to the corresponding station. If you choose to purchase an upgrade or an option, you pay the required cost and tuck them underneath the unit with the stats poking out at the bottom. It is important for us to see these for when combat happens later. Ships and marines can have one of these cards each. Putting additional modules on requires you to destroy one already equipped, which is then moved into your scrapyard. While building your forces, you may have spotted that in addition to the icons and numbers on the card, there's also some text. These are called traits. Most traits are only used and referenced during combat. There are, however, a couple of examples which are worth knowing now. The first word is unique. This represents a card which is special in some way. This might be a named character or a special prototype ship. You may only have one unique card in front of you at any one given time, so if you have 2 in your hand, you can only use the second one once the first is destroyed. The other symbol that is useful right now is the grey unit symbol. This indicates that a ship already has drones, fighters or marines stationed on it when it was built. If I choose to play a ship card with a grey marine symbol on it, I immediately look through the shipyard deck for that number of marines and immediately play it onto that ship or module at 0 additional cost. Once you've drawn your cards in this manner, you shuffle your shipyard and pop them back down.
If you play any cards that have grey fighter symbols on them instead, you do the same process, but instead play a fighter card from your deck. The setup phase may seem quite long and potentially complicated, but it uses steps and actions that are repeated every turn, so should instead be viewed more like a first turn rather than setting up the game. Once your force is deployed, we're ready to start play. Each player ends their setup phase by choosing any number of cards from their hand that they don't want and discarding them to their scrapyard. This makes way for more useful cards in a minute. Before we begin, we now need to determine who goes first. This is done by finding out your combined initiative score. The initiative value of each ship is indicated by the symbol in the bottom right and tells you how quick that ship is to react. The lower the number, the better. Add up the values of the initiatives of each of the ships and cards you played during the initial setup. The player with the lowest combined initiative score gets to go first. Play then continues clockwise for the remainder of the game. In the event that 2 players have the same combined initiative score, simply roll 1 volley die each, the highest goes first.
In Hull Breach, each player takes their turn one at a time. Each turn consists of 3 sections: logistics, manufacturing, and engagement. The first 2 of these are pretty much made up of the same elements that we've already covered in the setup phase.
In engagement phase, you get to blow stuff up. The logistics phase starts with reinforcements. Draw up to your maximum hand size from the top of your shipyard. The default maximum hand size is 5 cards, but there are some ships and modules which can increase this. If during this phase you run out of cards in your shipyard, you've just got to make do with what you've got. Next, you gain currency and resources for each ship, module or station card that can generate them. Simply add up the values in any upward facing arrow and add them to your stockpile by moving the token to the correct number. During the logistics phase, you can also repair any units that have been damaged. You may remove 1 wound from each marine, ship, module or station card that you own. If a unit has the word repair on it, then you can remove all wound markers from that card. Finally, resolve any card that has on it the phrase during the logistics phase. The second phase is the manufacturing phase and begins with research. You may play any breakthrough card from your hand onto the table in front of you. The effects of breakthroughs are written on the cards in full. You may next build any new units in exactly the same way as we did earlier. Simply play the card onto the table in front of you in the correct place, and then pay any relevant costs. When you play a new ship card, ensure that you deploy any marines, fighters or drones that are indicated by grey unit symbols. When building, you also have the option of gaining units through conscription. When using conscription, you may search through your shipyard for any one card and put it into play. The only downside to this is you must pay double its normal cost. Once you've conscripted, shuffle your shipyard and place it back on the table. Next, resolve any card effects that say on them during the manufacturing phase. Finally, you may reassign any fighters, marines or drones that are already in play to a different ship that can hold them. Fighters also have the option of being deployed into space. The last phase is the engagement phase. This is where you send your ships to attack your opponent's station with the hopes of taking them out of the game. Begin by declaring an opponent that you're going to attack. Yo! Once your opponent knows you're going to shoot them, you may select any number of ships from your fleet to attack. Physically move those cards over to your opponent so you remember which ones you've picked. Any ships that are left behind cannot join the combat later. For our first combat, we're going to keep things simple by leaving aside any special rules. Begin by playing any card that has on it deploy at the start of combat. The combat phase is broken down into two smaller steps: the volley fire action and the manoeuvring phase. We must determine the combat order by looking at the initiative values on each ship. Play progresses in ascending initiative order. So if we look at the ships in play, this Pegasus, which has an initiative value of 3, will get to go first. In the instance where two ships have the same initiative value, the attacker will go first. Attacks by ships on each other are referred to as volleys and use the 10-sided dice with which to attack. Sadly though, you don't get to throw them at your opponents. I'm going to start by shooting with my Pegasus at Oumaer's Kingfisher. It's important to note that even though the attacker's goal is to shoot at and destroy the station, you can't fire at the station during your first volley of each engagement, unless there are no defending ships. Once you know who's shooting who, you must roll a number of volley dice equal to your ship's attack value. This is the number in the target symbol.
Once the attacker has rolled their dice, you must check your ship's defense value, which is the number within the shield icon there. Any volley dice which equal or exceed your ship's defense value score a hit. 10s always score a hit, even if your ship plus bonuses have a defense value greater than 10. Scores of 1 automatically miss. For each successful hit, you place a wound token on your ship. If the number of hits on a ship equal to or exceed the number of health points, which is the number in the cross icon, then the ship is destroyed and is placed within the scrapyard. Any marines or upgrades associated with that ship are also destroyed.
If you happen to have a ship with an upgrade attached to it, you simply add the attack, defense and health point values of the upgrade to your ship's total. The next important point is with regards to the fighter that I deployed into this ship's fighter bay. Fighters and drones cannot be the target of volley fire while they're in a ship's bay, and are more or less ignored at this point. If you intend to use a fighter or drone in order to fire or use a special ability, you must launch them into space first. Launching a fighter does not require an action and can be done at any point in the combat regardless of its mothership's place in the initiative order. Unlike fighters, drones can only be launched during combat, either at the start or during their carrier's initiative turn. Once launched, fighters and drones act at their printed initiative value. If a fighter or a drone is looking like it's going to be destroyed, they do have the option of retreating to a ship's bay. This will cost the fighter or drone its volley that turn, but will not affect the ship it's landing on in any way. The next highest initiative value is 5, shared by 2 of my ships and 1 of Oumaer's. Since I'm the attacker, I will get to go first. I'm going to start by using my Drake to fire at his Kingfisher again. As I've scored one value higher than his defence, I do one more damage. I'm now going to try and finish it off by firing my cockatrice at the same ship. And do no more damage.
The ship with the next lowest initiative value is mine, so I get to fire back. I declare targets and fire using the volley dice much in the same way as Paul did. But I'm going to do something a little differently. In Hull Breach, you don't have to fire all of your guns at one target. This cruiser has 3 guns, so I'm going to fire twice at this ship and once at this ship. If you do decide to split your fire in this way, you must declare where all your shots are being fired before you roll, because once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. I roll the appropriate dice and compare these to the defense values on each target. Each time I roll equal or exceeding this value, I score a hit and allocate appropriate hit counters. So this one.
Once all volley actions have been completed, we move on to the manoeuvring phase. Assuming that I've got any marines in my attacking force, I may now declare a boarding action. This is where my marines will attempt to board and capture an enemy ship. Each player declares boarding actions again in initiative order. Move your ship over to the target. The target ship must be of a type that is the same size or bigger than the one you're using to do the boarding, as smaller ships will be too nippy and just get out of the way. Note that the ship you're targeting does not need to be the same one that you shot at this turn. This step is simply declaration of boarding, and they won't be resolved until later on during the boarding phase.
Any ship of mine which is currently the target of a boarding action from Paul is assumed to be locked down, and cannot perform a boarding action of its own and must defend against Paul. Once all boarding actions have been declared, we move on to the boarding phase.
During the boarding phase, each boarding action is resolved as a separate combat. Almost in exactly the same way as the ship combat, the Marines fight in initiative order. Players begin by revealing the stats of their Marine. In ascending initiative order, each player now declares who they're shooting at. Unlike in the volley phase, the defending player now has priority, so will get to go first in the event of a tie. They take a number of volley dice equal to their Marine's attack value and must beat their target's defense value. If any hits are scored, record them with a marker. Now it's my turn.
Since Paul's attacking force have won by killing all my defending Marines, he has one of 2 options. Either scuttle and destroy the ship, or capture it.
I think I'm going to nick it. I place my Marine under that ship to indicate that I've captured it. This ship remains under my control until either the end of the game, or until it's destroyed or captured by another player. If it is destroyed, it's placed into Oumaer's scrapyard as it was originally his. If you do capture an enemy ship, then you must leave those Marines on that vessel for the remainder of the game, unless they're relieved by another unit of Marines during the manufacturing phase. Otherwise, it could be assumed that the crew would revolt, and the ship will return to its previous owner. If you do choose to capture a ship, you can't electively scuttle it later on.
Once all boarding actions have been resolved, the first round of combat is over. The second round of combat works much in the same way as the first. The only difference is that this time the attacker can target the station. The station cannot be directly targeted, however, until all of its modules have been destroyed. Each module must be targeted and destroyed separately. If the station is destroyed, or if an attacker makes a successful boarding action, then I'm out of the game.
If a round of combat went badly, then I do have the option of retreating. At the end of the engagement round, after boarding, the attacking player nominates which of their ships are retreating. They successfully get away on the next volley action of the following turn, assuming they survive. It's important to note that fighters and drones cannot retreat unless there is a ship that can carry them. If the attacker decides not to retreat, then the combat continues to alternate between rounds of volley and manoeuvre until either all of the attacking player's ships are destroyed or the defending player's station is destroyed or captured.
If you happen to be playing a multiplayer game and destroy someone's station, you get to keep the spoils of war. The opposing player removes all of his cards, including those which were hijacked, and he's out of the game. The player who destroyed him gets to search their own shipyard for any one card. This card can be played without incurring any charge. You also get to keep the vanquished player's resources and currency and add them to your own stockpile. Attacking can be very costly in multiplayer games, and this is a way to make sure that the remaining players don't start divvying up your corpse.
So far, we haven't made any mention of the event cards. These represent unusual actions that can occur a number of times. The details on these cards tell you what the possible effects may be and when they can be used. Each of these cards has two possible outcomes, the nominal and the critical effects. When you play this card, you roll a d10. On a roll of a 1 or a 10, the critical effect occurs. Any other number and it's the nominal effect. In either case, simply read out the card in full to your opponent and then follow the instructions.
The combat that we did was a fairly basic one. Any of the ships in the game can have any potential number of special rules associated with them. The text on the cards that Paul mentioned earlier are what's known as traits. Traits can be very useful in tipping a fight in your favour. Let's take a closer look at some of these, and we'll throw a few of them into combat. Traits are split into two categories, active and passive. Active are those which you need to choose to use during combat. The first is called Interceptor. This trait is only used by defenders. When an attacker moves his fleet to attack, the defender can use this trait in order to fire one round of volleys before the attacker does his. You can fire as many volleys as the number next to the word Interceptor. The next is called Jammer and is used in place of firing a volley. You nominate a ship to jam. The targeted ship loses a number of attack dice equal to the number next to the word Jammer. A jammer cannot be used to target a station, as it is too huge. This is represented by one of the other coloured tokens.
Next we have Overload. This is your ship pumping all of its reserve power into overloading the weapons. During your attack action, you can choose to roll the number of dice next to the word Overload rather than your standard volley fire attack. Although this allows you to roll a huge number of attack dice, it does mean that you have to skip your next volley fire action in the following round with this ship. The next trait is called Raider. Since the attackers don't automatically shoot first, Raider gives you an opportunity to strike fast. Ships with the Raider trait attack at the same time as those with Interceptor, except it works for attackers instead of defenders. A ship with the Raider trait can also target the enemy station during the first round of an engagement.
The final active trait is the Target Painter trait. This allows your ship to highlight and identify an enemy ship. In place of a volley of fire, you nominate an enemy ship. This ship then loses an X number of defense against all other volley fire that round, where X being the number next to the word Target Painter. Again, this can't be used against stations.
The active traits are generally those that take the place of shooting. There are, however, a ton load of passive ones. These represent inherent features of a card rather than a particular skill, and includes the construction-specific ones we mentioned earlier. The escort trait comes into play during boarding. Any ship with the escort trait can cancel one boarding action declared by their opponent, including those upon itself. Alpha Strike ships are fast attack vessels. They add +3 to their first volley fire dice roll in an engagement. This stacks with Target Painter. Annihilate is just cool. It's like instant kill but for ships. If you roll any natural 10s on an attack dice from a ship with this trait, you deal 3 points of damage instead of 1.
Fearless ships get to go balls to the wall once per engagement. At any time during that engagement, they can swap their attack and defense values. So this ship, instead of having 1 attack and 5 defense, can choose to have 5 attack and 1 defense. Bear in mind though that once this is activated, they can't be swapped back until this either returns back to the station or is blown up. A ship with stealth trait has a good old-fashioned cloaking device. Because these are almost invisible, they add a +5 to their base defense value. Rolls of 10 still always hit though. A ship with the hunter trait has a cloaking device sniffer. I'm picturing a ship with a paintball gun firing in all directions. Ships with this trait ignore the stealth trait and fire at these ships at their base defense level.
A ship with the resistant trait cannot be damaged by anything other than volley fire, such as an event card, and trust me, those are bloody annoying. The next trait is called Stoic. This is your basic Boromir Last Stand trait. When any ship with Stoic is destroyed, it's allowed to have one last attack using its own volley fire against any legal target. The final passive trait is called Repair. During the volley action of any ship with this trait, they simply regain 1 lost hit point of damage. Since repair is a passive trait and does not take the place of a volley action, you can shoot on the same turn that you repaired something. Okay, now we know what the traits are, let's have a look at one round of combat with them in use. It may seem like we're going to complicate the crap out of the combat we did earlier, but the traits are actually fairly easy to use once you get used to them. So in this example, we have a fleet of 5 ships attacking a station with 5. We start with any ships that have either Interceptor in the defending fleet or Raider in the attacking one. Both of these ships have the same initiative, so the attacking ship will go first. The Kingfisher has a Raider value of 4, so rolls 4 volley dice to attack the mower. As one dice scored equal to or higher than the mower's defense value, 1 point of damage is caused. Next, the Drake rolls its 4 Interceptor dice to attack the Kingfisher, and causes 2 damage. Now we enter the initiative order. The lowest initiative is the Pegasus on 3, so it will volley fire first. It fires its single volley die at the Petrel. This is enough to beat the Petrel's defense, but it has a trait Stealth. This means it adds 5 to its defense, so takes no damage. Both the Crow and the Rook have the same initiative, so the attacking player can choose which they wish to fire first. The Rook fires with both of its volley dice at the Petrel. Since it has the Hunter trait, it ignores Stealth, and causes 2 points of damage. The Crow now activates its Fearless trait, so its attack value increases to 7, but defense falls to 2. It uses all 7 of its volley dice to fire at the mower, and does 4 damage. The next lowest initiative is 5. Since the Cockatrice is on the attacking side, it goes first. It uses the Overload trait, so may fire with 7 volley dice rather than the attack value of 3. It targets the Hydra, and scores 2 hits. The Cockatrice also has the trait Annihilate. This means that the 10 it rolled does 3 damage, bringing its total damage to 4 damage on the Hydra. Next, the Seagull chooses to use its Target Painter trait instead of shooting. It marks the Cockatrice with 4 tokens, reducing its effective defense by 4. The Petrel then uses Jammer on the Crow. This reduces the number of attack dice the Crow may use by 4 until the Petrel's next volley action. Next to act is the Hydra. As it has the trait Repair, it removes 1 of the damage it suffered. It fires its 6 attacks at the Cockatrice. As the Cockatrice's defense has now been lowered by the Target Painter, it takes 4 damage. Since this is higher than the number of health points, the Cockatrice is destroyed. The Mower now targets all of its shots at the Rook. As the Mower has Alpha Strike, we add +3 to its attack rolls in the first round of combat, meaning it does 5 points of damage. The Rook is destroyed. The Rook does, however, have the trait Stoic. This means that it gets an immediate volley when it's destroyed. It fires its 2 volley shots at the Petrel. As it has Hunter, it only needs to achieve a 5. It does 1 point of damage and destroys the Petrel, and is then removed. Since the Petrel is destroyed, the Jammer tokens it placed on the Crow are also removed. Finally, the Station will act. Its combined attack value is 13 as we add together all of the modules. It splits its fire, 5 each on the Crow and Kingfisher and 3 on the Pegasus. First, the Crow. Since the Crow used its Fearless trait, it only has a defense of 2, meaning it takes 4 damage and is destroyed. The Kingfisher takes no damage. Finally, the Pegasus also takes no damage. With the volley actions over, we move to Manoeuvring. The Drake declares a boarding action on the Kingfisher. In reaction, the Pegasus uses the Escort trait to cancel the boarding action. With all volley actions and boarding actions now accounted for, that round of the engagement phase is over.
You'd be forgiven for thinking that this was a complicated game, but in actual fact it's relatively simple because many of the special rules aren't often employed. Here's a turn breakdown. Logistics phase. Start by drawing up to your maximum hand size, normally 5 from your shipyard. Collect resources and currency from ships and station cards. Repair 1 wound on every ship, station or marine card. Ships with repair trait return to full health. Finally, resolve any cards that say during the logistics phase. 2. Manufacturing phase. Deploy any breakthrough card onto the table, paying any costs. Deploy ship, module or marine cards from your hand at the stated cost. Conscript up to 1 unit from your shipyard, paying double its face cost. Resolve any cards with the during manufacturing phase on them. And finally, you may reassign any marines, fighters or drones to new legal host ships or stations. 3. Engagement. To start, the attacker declares target player and moves chosen ships. Deploy any cards with the deploy at start of engagement. Resolve any interceptor or raider volley actions. Resolve volley actions in initiative order. Declare boarding actions in initiative order. Resolve escort effects. Resolve all boarding actions. 4. Retreat. Attacker can declare retreat with any or all of its attacking ships. Ships successfully retreat if they survive to their next volley action.
Hull breach is about a lot more than throwing some ship cards at your enemy and rolling some dice. The setup of your force and logistics of your fleet can mean that decisions made out of combat are as important as which ships you choose to shoot at. Freighters are civilian ships that engage in trading during your logistics phase to keep your coffers full. When you declare a trading action, you have to choose between the 3 types of trading that you want to do. Freighters marked as available are trading locally to your station. Roll 1 die and compare it with the value marked on the card. If you roll equal to or higher than this value, you've succeeded. You then carry out the action listed in the text next to that icon. Freighters that are on mission have entered an agreement with an opposing commander. Place the freighter face up at the commander's station. On their logistics phase, you roll 1 die and compare it with your freighter's on-mission value. If you succeed, you may perform the listed action. The final mission type is underway. Freighters that are underway are attempting to trade with some distant allies off table. Turn the freighter face down. At the start of your next logistics phase, you turn the freighter face up and roll 1 die and compare it with your underway value. If you succeed, you may then perform the listed action. On a roll of a 10, you may additionally draw 1 card from the top of your shipyard, assuming you've got space in your hand. If you roll a 1, the freighter has been destroyed.
There are 2 optional victory conditions which can be added to any game which turn it into a true card game 4X. The first is economic victory. When setting up the game, each player takes a green token and places it onto their stockpile cards. This is referred to as the reserve. During each player's logistics phase, they can choose to transfer up to 4 resources and currency into their reserve. Play then continues as normal. As soon as any player reaches 20 resources and currency in their reserve, they are declared the winner.
The other non-combat victory condition stems from the use of freighters and introduces another currency to the game, diplomacy points. Diplomacy points are gained by sending your freighters on mission or underway. When you roll to determine if a trade action is successful, any number over the target value gains you diplomacy points equal to the difference. Keep track of your diplomacy points by adding a blue token to both of your stockpiles. As soon as any player reaches 40 diplomacy points, they win the game. That's it from us to Skip the Rulebook. If you enjoyed this video, please press like. If you want to hear more from Skip the Rulebook, hit subscribe. You can also find out more about us on Facebook, Twitter, and skiptherulebook.com.
Join us next time for your chance to dive headfirst into that new board game of yours without any of that tedious rule reading.
See you later. We just need to remember that we've both got our decks in our hands.
Okay, cool.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Oh, he gone been done it. Says it better. That's the way I tell him.
Start the talking.
Any volley
Any volleyball's? Throw pasters at them.
Take your eye to the fire.
Ooh.
No, that's too gangster. Like East Side and West Side.
Dude.
Yeah, also.